Welcome to Passionate Reply, and welcome to Great Albums. Today I'll be discussing one of the most unique and unforgettable albums around, Big Science by Laurie Anderson. It's very possible that you may not necessarily recognize her by name, but this album's big hit has been riffed on and reused many times throughout Western popular culture, so when I play it for you, it just might seem hauntingly familiar.
Oh, Superman. Oh, John. Oh, Mom and Dad. Mom and Dad. Hi. I'm not home right now. But if you want to leave a message, just start talking at the sound of the tone. Hello? This is your mother. Are you there? Are you coming home?
Put simply, Oh Superman is not your conventional pop hit by any stretch of the imagination. It features little more than a sparse, barren electronic instrumental and Anderson's eerily vocoder-treated voice, not so much singing as acting out a one-woman stage play. It has much more in common with the avant-garde, minimalist works of 20th century modern classical composers like Philip Glass and Steve Reich than it does anything you would hear on pop radio in the 1980s. While you might assume that it entered mainstream consciousness through being used in some art film, it actually was a bona fide pop hit, particularly in Great Britain, which has always had a pronounced affinity for surprisingly weird chart entries. While the single was initially given only a small release, like most of Anderson's earlier work, the prominent British radio DJ John Peel discovered it and fell in love with it. And thanks to his frequent playing of it on the air, a lot of other people fell in love with it too, propelling it to number 2 in the UK charts. I think it's a testament to just how different the media landscape used to be once upon a time in the 20th century. Nowadays, the radio doesn't really have room for idiosyncratic tastemakers like Peel, and the independent DJs who remain certainly don't have the reach that Peel did. I suppose it's the 20th century version of sea shanties and other oddities becoming trends on social media. But anyway, setting aside the strange legacy Oh Superman has as the world's least likely hit single, we can appreciate it perfectly well as a moving work of art. Oh Superman is not really a pop song, but what it is perhaps a desperate plea for comfort and protection. The figure or concept of mother seems to be the focus of this text and serves as the apparent final resort of its insecure, searching rhetoric. We get this idea in a microcosm in the famous opening line, inspired by an aria by Jules Massenet. Oh Superman, oh Judge, oh Mom and Dad. It's an appeal to any and all higher powers, but culminates with perhaps the most primal, intuitive authority we can understand. Our parents. Towards the end of the piece, the narrator begs to be held in the arms of Mom, but they're described not as soft and warm, but automatic, electronic, and petrochemical, creating an uncanny conflation of innate human connections and the harshly artificial technological conditions of modernity. Have we made the promises of technology and science into some sort of idol, looking to them for reassurance, projecting onto them a goodwill or benevolence like a mother has for her children? Themes of high technology, as well as the search for safety and security, are found throughout the rest of the album, as is that stark, minimalist instrumentation.
Good evening. This is your captain. We are about to attempt a crash landing extinguish all cigarettes. Place your tray tables in their upright lock position. Your captain says, put your head on your knees. Captain says, put your head in your hands. Captain says, put your hands on your head, put your hands on your hips. This is your captain. We are going down. We are all going down together.
Expanding somewhat on the references to aeroplanes found in Oh Superman, opening track From the Air is narrated by the captain of a doomed flight, instructing the passengers how to handle the imminent crash landing. It's many people's very worst nightmare and plunges us straight into the sense of fearing for our lives in a situation that's completely beyond our control. A bold move for the very first track we hear. From the Air leads with somewhat plausible suggestions, like a very dated request that passengers extinguish all cigarettes, but gradually becomes increasingly surreal, adding to that nightmarish feeling. Anderson delivers her lines with a palpable sense of authority that stirs you to want to obey her character even as they prove their unreliability. A taut, unresolved, saxophone-driven ostinato throughout the track provides a constant sense of tension and anxiety, which certainly suits the mood. Until the end of the song, at which point it abruptly cuts off, presumably to represent the crash occurring and the sudden deaths of those on board. I like to think of From the Air as a sort of dark counterpart to Oh Superman, the latter of which is the opening track of the second side. While Oh Superman deifies technology as a source of maternalistic comfort, From the Air presents us with the ultimate failure of technology. Slick and polished until the end, but unable to provide any real hope of meaningful security. That human desire for security is interrogated more directly on the final track of Side 1, Born Never Asked.
It was a large room full of people, all kinds, and they had all arrived at the same building at more or less the same time, and they were all free, and they were all asking themselves the same question: what is behind that curtain? You were born, and so you're free. So happy birthday.
While Born Never Asked is much more laconic than tracks like From the Air and Oh Superman, it's no less probing and thought-provoking, presenting us with a world of people who are fundamentally free and yet deeply unsatisfied. You were born, quips Anderson, and so you are free. But we're all too busy asking for a bigger answer and some explicit, deeper meaning to our existences that we can't appreciate the simple freedom to live our lives however we want to in the absence of any overt goals. The track begins by establishing a stately, hand-clap-driven backing, which serves to underscore the plainness or simplicity of its message and is ultimately overtaken by a mournful violin outro. Perhaps the embodiment of our emotional turmoil as we seek the comfort of clear answers, despite the fact that they never arrive. If only the world were as simple and well-defined as it seemed to be when we were children, filled with that unthinking and unconditional love for our mothers. Born Never Asked asks us to question what it really means to be free and whether or not it's even satisfying or helpful to possess freedom. It's worth noting that all the pieces that comprise Big Science were chiefly intended as part of Anderson's much longer magnum opus entitled United States, which he completed in 1984. In that context, criticism of the value of freedom is perhaps also criticism of certain traditional American moral values. While Oh Superman prominently mentions American planes, I think the track that has the most to say about being American is the title track of the album.
Hey pal, how do I get to town from here? And he said, we'll just take a right where they're gonna build that new shopping mall. Go straight past where they're gonna put in the freeway. And take a left at what's gonna be the new sports center. And keep going till you hit the place where they're thinking of building that drive-in bank. You can't miss it. And I said, this must be the place.
The title track of Big Science takes us to a desolate and mostly empty landscape, defined more by its potential to be molded into something habitable than anything it already innately is. It's a frigid perspective on America as terra nullius, a wasteland filled with nothing but ultra-recent and ultra-artificial capitalist developments, as opposed to any real history or meaning. With its chilling, coyote-like howls and nods to Western movies and dependence upon cars, it can easily be contextualized as particularly American. But ultimately, the human drive to improve our environment through questionable, perhaps even destructive means is fairly universal. Much like the emotionally unsatisfying sense of freedom bestowed upon those who are born in Born Never Asked, the title track of Big Science shows us a world full of endless possibilities, but devoid of any true happiness born of those possibilities. The term Big Science dates back to the mid-20th century and has been used to describe the increasingly large scale of many significant scientific efforts, particularly those supported by world governments, and particularly their militaries. During and after the Second World War, it became increasingly necessary for nations that wanted a place on the world stage to rope science into the military-industrial complex, especially in light of the development of atomic weaponry. Given the album's thematic emphasis on the way we look to science and technology to provide some aegis of protection, and often in harmful or destructive ways, it's a very fitting choice for the title. I think that connection to the nuclear bomb is also an important key to interpreting the album's cover art. On the cover of Big Science, we see Anderson lit very harshly from the right, so much so that her sunglasses are rendered completely white by the powerful light. While her pose is very deliberate and perhaps even stilted, she appears to be raising her arms as though to shield herself from whatever is casting this bright light. Is Anderson perhaps portraying an atomic scientist, observing a nuclear blast with its signature burst of radiant light? Overall, however we interpret this gesture, the black and white imagery and completely empty backdrop seem to pair well with that sparse and minimalistic instrumentation. Anderson appears on the cover with her signature costume, a solid white suit, which when paired with her short hairstyle gives her a somewhat androgynous appearance. It also looks a bit like a lab coat, often worn by scientists and doctors, the figures who culturally embody that principle of benevolent authorities backed by the power of technology and science. Whenever artists who only briefly felt the spotlight of mainstream success are discussed, it can be tempting to ask whether or not such figures deserved more or better. In the case of Anderson, though, she never expected Oh Superman to become the breakout hit that it did, and never followed it up with anything actively pursuing the pop charts. In the wake of her most famous work, Anderson went right back to doing what she had been doing, making great but totally avant-garde art. She's a figure of art music and the art world through and through, performing her elaborate multimedia works at museums, appearing in a number of festival circuit art films, and accepting honorary degrees. Anderson has had a perfectly successful career, dwelling precisely in the realm of her choosing, and I don't think there's any better outcome than that. If you like big science, you'll find plenty more of striking and evocative works throughout the rest of her long and ongoing career.
Sun's coming up like a big bald head bulging up over the grocery store. It's Sharky's day. It's Sharky's day today. Sharky wakes up and Sharky says, there was this man, and there was this road, and if only I could remember these dreams. I know they're trying to tell me something. Strange dreams. And Sharky says, I turn around, it's fear. I turn around again, and it's love. Oh yeah, strange dreams. And a little girl.
My favorite track on Big Science is Sweaters. With a Celtic-sounding melody, a grating fiddle, and perhaps the most vocally hated musical instrument of all time, the bagpipes, Sweaters is a dirge about an ancient subject, falling out of love. But despite its backward-looking folk setting, the jump from I no longer love your eyes to I no longer love your sweaters anchors it into the realm of the totally mundane, if not banal. Overall, though, what I think really makes it stand out on the album is its sense of levity. As I've discussed earlier, Big Science is loaded with really heavy themes about technology, Americana, and the meaning of life, so a song that's not only about a romantic relationship, but also about sweaters, pens, and pencils, jammed into the middle of the first side, really feels like a sort of palate cleanser while you're listening to this. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.
I no longer love your mouth. I no longer love your eyes. I no longer love your eyes. I no longer love the color of your sweaters. I no longer love it. I no longer love the color of your sweaters. I no longer love the way